Hi, my name is Chris Higgins, and this is Stories of the Humber River. This past February, in the thick of COVID-19, I was standing by the river near my house, listening to the sound of the water. I looked across at the other bank and saw these letters in graffiti style that said, STORYZ. And I thought, okay, I got time. River, I'm listening. I live in Warren Park, in the west end of Toronto. People around here just call it the Valley. Up at the north end, right near Dundas Street, there's an old hotel called Lambton House. Nowadays, it's used as a local museum. Of course, it's been closed for the pandemic. In normal times, the local historian there is Madeleine McDowell. She's a neighborhood gem. She's lived in the area her whole life. We had a very nice talk in her backyard. The first thing I asked Madeleine about was how she came by her love of history.
My great-uncle, when I was very little, used to bring me books. He was the closest thing I had to a grandfather. My grandfather died in the flu epidemic in 1918. There was a series of 3 volumes that came out just at the end of the Second World War on the history of Canada, an illustrated history of Canada, and he brought those home for me, and I understood by the time I was 7 that Etienne Brûlé went by my door in 1615 and La Salle in 1680 on his way to the Mississippi.
I walk by the river a lot, and one of the things I notice is a lot of the trees are falling down, and the forest is, quite frankly, not very healthy in parts. And I've read about a black oak savanna that used to be here a long time ago, and I asked Madeleine if some of it still remains.
A great deal of it does remain. Toronto, the whole of Toronto out to Oakville and Burlington and east to Virgin on Ajax is black oak savanna. It is one of the, I think, 7 black oak savannas remaining in North America. It's not completely intact, but there's a great deal of it here. A black oak savanna is not just black oaks. It's all of the oaks, black, red, white. The white oaks live 3 times as long as the black oaks. It's savanna in that it's a sandy, well-drained soil, so that all of the trees and plants have deep tap roots. There are maples that are indigenous to the black oak savanna, beech nut, butternut, all of the nut trees, hickory, and certainly black walnut as well. And a lot of that still remains. And there are a lot of oak trees along the river and other remnants of the savanna. The trees that you see, a lot of them are 150 to 250 years old. If they're 200 years old, then they're remnant of the forest that was here when the Mississaugas were here and, quote, sold this land to the British.
I was surprised to learn that some of the savanna is still around. But what about the fish that were here when the settlers first arrived?
The Humber was a natural source, a major source of Atlantic salmon. The Atlantic salmon is the king of salmon. In Europe, it was regarded as the king of salmon, as well as here. The Aboriginal people who were here used to, when the salmon ran in the spring, would go down to the Humber marshes and catch them. They would spear fish for them, and they would catch what they needed. they would eat a lot fresh, and they would smoke more so that they would have more to keep over the season. In addition to that, there were a great many other species of fish that lived in the Humber. Mrs. Simcoe wrote of 7 and 8 foot long sturgeon. There were 9 foot sturgeon in the Humber marshes. Sturgeon lived to a tremendous age. They'd have 100, 150 years sometimes, and they aren't producing eggs until they're 20 years old or thereabouts. We fished a lot of that out. The natives, they respected the fact that you catch some, but you don't catch all of them. The first settlers here, they had to pay for their land, and how they paid for their land was they went and they spearfished. A barrel of salmon, 150-pound barrel of salmon, 6 or 7 barrels, and they could pay for a chunk of their land, and they would go and catch a lot of barrels of salmon, and that eliminated the fish. The Atlantic salmon is making a comeback. There's been some stocking. I've helped with that. I've actually released salmon fry into Black Creek in the Humber. We do have salmon in the Humber, but it's West Coast Chinook and other West Coast salmon, and they run in the fall. They go upstream. They lay their eggs and die. The Atlantic salmon, they migrate in the spring, and they lay their eggs, and then they go back to Lake Ontario and return again 2 years later. The Atlantic salmon are about 2.5, 3 feet long, and they're more a steely blue-gray spotted. There's a man who lives in the valley who is a fisherman, and he's quite excited about the salmon. He has caught an Atlantic salmon. He uses a hook that's not snelled. So he caught an Atlantic salmon, photographed it, and released it back into the river again. And we sent photographs of that to the Conservation Authority and to MNR. We're winning. It's coming back.
That was Madeleine the historian speaking. But what about her own memories of the river?
There were a number of boathouses along the river. There was one on this side of the river, more or less where the boat launch is now, by the Petro-Canada station, which was Rousseau's home. That was a boatyard, and particularly the canoe place. My parents kept a canoe there. I was 2. My mother and father took me down there, and we got out of the car, and I knew this was something. This is interesting. They're talking with each other, and I know that they're taking me someplace special. And we went down and onto the dock and into the boathouse, and they pointed to the canoe, which was the third up from the ground, and the men lifted it down, took it out, put it in the water. They put me in the middle, mother in the bow, father in the stern, and off we went, and we spent the day on the Humber marshes. And I remember it like yesterday. I was canoeing with Margot Duncan last August, and we went from the yacht club down the river and into one of the ponds, and the pond has not changed at all. It is exactly as I remember it, with the lily pads. And my father I was allowed to reach over the side of the canoe and put my hands around a water lily and lift it up out of the water and smell it and very carefully put it back in the water. It wouldn't do it any harm. And I saw the frogs, and I thought the frogs were wonderful. I loved frogs. And he picked up a turtle. He slipped a paddle underneath the turtle so that its feet were hanging down on either side, and he lifted it up out of the water so that I could get a good look at it, and then put it back in the water. Didn't bother the turtle. There were swallows nesting in the banks, and I wanted to climb up and look at the swallows with some of the other people that were doing that. And my parents told me, no, we don't bother the birdies. You don't get up close to the birds. We look at them from a distance. You get up close to the birds and you frighten them, and they'll go away, and their babies will die. You mustn't do that. And I never forgave them. I also recognized that they were absolutely right. They trained me very well. And we got to look at I got to see a great blue heron standing around in the reeds at the edge of one of the ponds. And there were red-winged blackbirds all over the place, and other birds. The ponds and levees of the Humber marshes are unchanged over the last more than 2,000 years, excepting there were a couple of ponds on the west bank that were part of a golf course that was over there. Nobody bothered with them. They were maintained as was until the city decided to put in the Humber Bay sewage plant, and they wiped out the golf course, of course, but they wiped out the ponds and levees of the Humber marshes on the west bank.
Time for a loaded question. Will the government's plans to develop the Oak Ridges Moraine have any effect on the Humber River?
Oh, it's loaded all right.
Yeah.
If it happens, the Humber's dead. All of the rivers that originate up there, if you destroy their headwaters, you haven't got any river left. The water that goes into the ground, the recharge there, the Oak Ridges Moraine is a remnant from 2 glaciers back. The water that flows out of there flows into Lake Ontario, not above ground. The rivers that we see on the surface are minor. The aquifers that flow into Lake Ontario below ground are of major importance. That is our clean water. The aquifer that flows under High Park and out into Lake Ontario is what gives us that 40-degree temperature, 40-degree Fahrenheit temperature of water that is the Toronto water temperature that comes out of your tap. It's clean. Where you destroy the recharge, where you pollute with... Transportation is important, but an over-concern with transportation is not. When I was on the school board, I was very concerned about children's safety crossing roads. And Fred Gardner appointed a gentleman, a Mr. Cass, as Commissioner of Roads in Metropolitan Toronto. And when we asked for a school zone on Jane Street to protect children crossing the road, Commissioner Cass sent back the message that his concern was the movement of traffic, not the safety of school children. And our whole society's concern with the movement of traffic, not the safety of the life forces that we have to live with mustn't be disregarded.
And if I was wondering at all about the strength of Madeleine's convictions, my next question about the graffiti on the bridges and retaining walls of the river left me in no doubt.
If you have something to say and the skills to say it well, you are an artist. Other than that, you're no more than a dog making a mark. I'm an artist. I wouldn't do... The graffiti on the Old Mill Bridge really bothers me. You look at it and that bridge is drop dead gorgeous. It was built in 1916 in the middle of the First World War. And it's a lovely bridge, and it's been refurbished and restored, and it needs a little bit more work done on it again. How anybody could look at that and then spray paint it with yuck. You know, I that's inexcusable. You have to, as an artist, develop your skills so that you can speak freely. And that's with words or with movement, as in dance, or with music, or sound of various sorts, or visually with sculpture or paint. But you have to have the skill, and not necessarily training, but usually training, to say what you have to say freely, clearly, and well. And then you have to have something to say. The public have a right to free space, free of intrusion. There is participation and there is intrusion, and they are different. And some people don't recognize the difference. Banksy did things and does things. And if Banksy does something, people say, okay. But if some twerp comes along and just makes a mess, people don't have to say okay. They can say take it away. And sometimes it does damage that is irreparable. The guy that builds the little stone things in the river, that's fine.
You think it's okay?
They're fine. None of them are permanent. The river takes it away, and he knows that. If he were putting in a permanent sculpture there, I would have a completely different take on it. But what he does, it's a matter of balance. It's a little bit of, it's a very high level of skill and a little bit of magic, and you can go and you can see it, and then the river comes along and it's gone again, and that's fine.
Speaking of people who have left their mark on the Humber River, here's a name. Robert Holmes Smith. An interesting character, and one that I'll return to in a future episode. There's a lot to say. But I wanted to touch on this man who developed so many beautiful neighborhoods along the Humber.
His home out on Eden Bridge, where he died. I've read his will. He had only a few $100s cash, and his bank accounts were under $10,000. He was a big spender. He drank. He ran his business out of the old mill because he loved it. He fell in love with the old mill ruins. He wrote of the ruins as the ruins dreaming on the Humber. And he dreamt too. And he wanted to preserve those dreams for everyone. He could see it as money. He could see it as monetizing, but he had a much broader perspective than that as well. He wanted to put in a streetcar route up the Humber from Queen Street to connect up with Dundas, going straight up the valley. Okay. That didn't materialize. He was responsible for building the breakwall down at the lake. He was chair of the Toronto Harbour Commission and built the Lakeshore Road out from downtown Toronto to connect up with his development out at the Humber. He had his warts, but generally speaking, his vision was good. It was there was some magic in his vision, and he didn't overstep it.
Madeleine could have gone on for a long time, but I thanked her and asked her one more question. What was her greatest hope for the Humber going forward?
Well, there are a number of things. One, the bridge at the mouth of the Humber, the pedestrian and cycle bridge, it is a Toronto icon. It was built in 1995. It won national awards for its design. When you drive into or out of Toronto, you can see it for miles. I would like to see that designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I put it forward for designation in 2002. It hasn't happened yet. That would be a nice marker for the mouth of the Humber and the importance of the river. We have celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Humbers being designated as a Canadian Heritage River. Nobody knows. Toronto ignores the fact that this is a Canadian Heritage River. It was the 26th Heritage River in Canada, the first urban heritage river in Canada, and nobody knows about it or particularly cares about it. When people find out about it, they get quite excited. If this were a better known fact, there would be a greater respect for the river and a greater understanding of its importance as a piece of nature that gives us back good health and mental health and physical well-being as well. They're starting to do documentation now on the fact that poor people, working class people who live and are exposed to water, ponds and rivers and streams and lakes, have a better quality of life and a better health than those who are not. For the rich, it doesn't make much difference, but for the poor, it makes a tremendous difference. Plus, exposure to the trees and remnants of the Aboriginal forest, the Tubananique Grove, the ancient oak trees that remain along the Toronto carrying place. I would like to see that better recognized out of respect to the Mississaugas of the Credit.
That's it for episode 1 of Stories of the Humber River. I'm Chris Higgins. Thank you so much for listening.